Have you ever experienced that sinking feeling when you sit down to watch a movie in English? You're totally ready to relax, you have your snacks, you press play, and within 5 minutes you realize you're completely lost? You're rewinding the same scene 3 times, squinting at the screen, and you still have no idea why the characters are laughing?
Oh, Tom, please don't remind me. That used to be my Friday night ritual. Rewind, play, pause, panic. Rewind, play, pause, panic. It is the most frustrating feeling in the world.
I think every single person listening to us right now just nodded their head. Hello, everyone, and a massive welcome back to another episode of Real English Voices. I'm Tom.
And I'm Ria. Whether you're listening to us while you're stuck in traffic, maybe you're at the gym trying to ignore the treadmill, or just relaxing at home with a coffee, we are so incredibly happy to have you with us today.
We are indeed. You know, here at Real English Voices, we have a very specific philosophy that drives everything we do. We believe that learning English isn't just about memorizing a textbook or passing a grammar exam.
Absolutely not. It's about connection. It's about people. It's about expressing who you really are and opening doors to opportunities you didn't even know existed. It's not just a subject. It's a lifestyle.
Exactly. And usually we're interviewing experts or breaking down complex language concepts. But today we're doing something very different. We're going to look at a case study of resilience. And that case study is sitting right across from me.
Oh no, I suddenly feel the spotlight burning on my face. Are you putting me in the hot seat, Tom?
I am absolutely putting you in the hot seat. You know, Ria, our listeners hear your voice every week. You sound confident, you're fluent, you joke around in English, but I think it's important for people to know that you didn't wake up like this.
I definitely did not. It feels like a lifetime ago, honestly. It was a long, messy, and sometimes very embarrassing road to get here.
So, let's take it back. Take us back to the beginning. You're originally from Barcelona, Spain. What was your relationship with English like when you were growing up? Did you love it?
Love it, Tom. I barely noticed it. To be honest, English wasn't a priority for me at all. In school, it was just another subject. It was like math or geography. I had to pass the test to make my parents happy, and that was it.
I think that's the case for so many people. It's academic, right? It's not real.
Exactly. I remember sitting in that classroom, staring at the chalkboard. The teacher would explain a grammar rule, and I would write it down. Then she would explain the exception to the rule. Then the exception to the exception. It felt like this giant, complicated puzzle that I was never going to solve. I just couldn't see how memorizing these dry rules would ever help me in the real world.
So you were stuck in that student mindset, but obviously something changed. You aren't still sitting in that classroom. What was the catalyst?
Well, it started slowly. I began to realize that English was everywhere. It was in the movies I wanted to watch, the music I was dancing to, the social media posts I was scrolling through. I started getting this serious case of FOMO.
Fear of missing out.
Yes, I felt like there was this massive global party happening, and I was stuck outside looking through the window because I didn't have the password. But the real turning point, the moment that actually shook me awake, was a trip to London with my friends.
Ah, the classic trip to London. Why do I have a feeling this didn't go smoothly?
Smoothly? It was a disaster, Tom, a total train wreck. I went there thinking, okay, I got an A in my English class, I can do this. We landed, and the reality hit me like a bus.
Describing the reality gap. What happened?
I couldn't understand anyone. The accent, the speed, the slang, it was like they were speaking an alien language. I remember standing in a coffee shop trying to order a simple latte, and the barista asked me a question. I just froze. I panicked. I couldn't communicate effectively at all.
That is such a humbling moment. You realize that textbook English and real English are two different planets.
It was humiliating, but it was also the best thing that could have happened. I came back to Barcelona, and I was angry. I was determined. I told myself, okay, no more games. I have to take this seriously.
So you have the motivation, but motivation isn't a method. What did you actually do when you got back? Did you open the grammar books again?
No way. I knew the grammar books had failed me in London. I needed to learn how to hear the language. So I decided to immerse myself completely. I tried to create a little London in my bedroom.
Little London. I like that. What did that look like?
It started with movies and TV shows. I picked my favorites, the ones I had already seen in Spanish, so I knew the plot. At first, I watched with Spanish subtitles, but I realized I was just reading and not listening. So I switched to English subtitles.
That is a huge step. English audio plus English text.
It was incredibly hard. And then, eventually, I turned the subtitles off. And that brings us back to what we said at the start.
It was painful. I would miss 50% of the dialogue. I'd have to rewind, listen again, rewind, listen again.
Most people would quit right there. They'd say, "I'm not smart enough," and turn the subtitles back on. Why did you keep going?
Because I knew that listening to native speakers, really listening to the raw audio, was the only way to fix my ears. I also used music. I would listen to English pop songs and try to sing along, even if I had no idea what the lyrics meant.
Music is such a cheat code. It teaches you the rhythm and the flow of the language before you even understand the grammar. It gets your mouth moving.
Exactly. It makes the language physical. But, Tom, I don't want to make it sound like a magical montage. It wasn't all fun. There were specific things about English that drove me absolutely crazy.
Let's talk about the villains of the story. What were the biggest linguistic headaches for you during this time?
2 words. Phrasal verbs.
Oh, phrasal verbs, the absolute worst.
They're illogical. You have a verb like give and a preposition like up. You put them together, and suddenly it means to quit? Why? Or bring up. You can bring up a box from the basement, or you can bring up a child. It felt like every time I learned one, 3 more would pop up to confuse me.
And the worst part is, native speakers use them constantly. We don't say, "Please extinguish your cigarette." We say, "Put out your cigarette." If you don't know "put out," you're lost.
Exactly. I would study them, feel confident, and then hear them used in a totally different way in a movie and feel stupid all over again. And that led to my biggest challenge, the fear of speaking.
The silent period. You can understand, but the words get stuck in your throat.
I was terrified of making mistakes. I was a perfectionist. I would rehearse a sentence in my head like, "I need to buy a ticket." But when I opened my mouth to say it, I would freeze. I didn't want people to judge me.
That fear of judgment is universal. But mistakes are actually where the magic happens. Speaking of mistakes, I recall you telling me about a particularly funny one a while back. Are you willing to share it with the class?
Oh, gosh. Okay, I will share it, but you have to promise not to laugh too hard.
I promise nothing.
Okay, so I was at a dinner with some English-speaking friends. We had just finished this huge meal, and I was completely stuffed. I wanted to say, "I am full."
Simple sentence, 3 words.
You would think, but my pronunciation of the vowel sound was off. Instead of saying, "I am full," I looked at everyone at the table and said, very seriously, "I am fool." I am fool. You just declared yourself an idiot to the whole group.
Yes, loud and clear. I am fool. My friends paused for a second, and then they just burst out laughing. They started calling me the fool for the rest of the day.
That is hilarious, but actually, that's a great lesson. I bet you never messed up the pronunciation of full and fool ever again.
Never. That moment of embarrassment burned the correct pronunciation into my brain forever. And it taught me that the world doesn't end when you mess up. People laugh, and you move on.
So let's look at how you broke through that fear. You went from "I am fool" to hosting a podcast. How did you bridge that gap? How did you get comfortable speaking?
I realized I needed a safe space to practice where no one could hear me. So I started talking to myself.
Like narrating your life?
Yes, I would walk around my apartment narrating my actions. Now I am making coffee. I am looking for the sugar. Where did I put my keys? It sounds crazy, right? Like I was losing my mind.
Not at all. It's actually a classic technique. It connects your thought process directly to your speech without the pressure of a listener.
Exactly. It got my mouth muscles comfortable with the shapes of English words. Once I felt a little braver, I took the next step. I joined an online language exchange community.
That's a big jump, talking to real humans. Were you nervous?
I was sweating. I was so worried I would look stupid or that I wouldn't understand them. But I learned something amazing. People are incredibly kind.
Most people in those communities are learners too, right? Or they're there to help.
Exactly. They knew I was learning. They didn't expect me to be Shakespeare. They appreciated that I was trying. That acceptance gave me the confidence to keep showing up week after week.
So you had the mindset shift and you had the social practice, but were there any specific technical exercises you did to improve your accent or your flow?
Yes, the absolute game changer for me was a technique called shadowing.
We mention this a lot, but for the new listeners, break down exactly how you did it.
Okay, so I would take a short clip of a native speaker, maybe from a podcast or a movie, just 10 or 15 seconds. I would listen to it, and then I would repeat it exactly as they said it.
When you say exactly, do you mean just the words?
No, not just the words. The emotion, the pause, the pitch, the speed. If they shouted, I shouted. If they whispered, I whispered. I tried to become a clone of that speaker.
It's like acting practice. It forces you to stop reading the language and start feeling the rhythm of it.
Precisely. And speaking of listening, podcasts were my best friends. I turned my dead time into learning time.
Dead time?
Explaining. Commuting, washing dishes, folding laundry. I always had a podcast on. At first, I used podcasts that had transcripts. I needed that safety net. I would read along to check my understanding, but gradually, I stopped using the transcripts.
And that must have been scary, taking the training wheels off.
It was, but I realized something huge. I didn't need to understand 100% of the words to follow the story. If I understood 80%, I could get the gist, and that was enough. I stopped obsessing over every single unknown word.
That is such a liberating mindset. But let's talk about those unknown words. Vocabulary is usually the place where people get stuck. You learn a cool word on Tuesday, and by Friday, it has vanished from your brain. How did you stop that from happening?
The leaky bucket syndrome. I hated that. So I started a vocabulary journal, but I had a rule: no naked words.
No naked words? Explain that.
The context rule. I never wrote down just the word and the definition. That's useless. I always wrote the word inside the sentence I found it in. Context is king. You need to see how the word lives in the wild.
And did you just write it and forget it?
No, I used a technique called spaced repetition. I used an app called Anki. It's fantastic. It basically predicts when you are about to forget a word and shows you the flashcard right at that moment. It kept the vocabulary fresh in my mind without me having to study for hours.
That handles the input. What about output?
I challenged myself. If I learned a new word like reluctant, I would force myself to use it in a conversation that week, even if it felt awkward. Using it creates a memory hook that reading never will.
I also love the trick you told me about associations, using your personal life to remember words.
Yes, this makes it fun. For example, when I learned the word meticulous, which means very careful about details, I immediately thought of my aunt. She is obsessed with cleaning every tiny speck of dust. So now, whenever I hear meticulous, I see my aunt's face.
That is brilliant. Connect the English word to a strong emotional memory you already have. Just maybe don't tell your aunt she's your vocabulary flashcard.
I will keep that a secret.
So, Ria, you've done the immersion, the shadowing, the embarrassment, the vocabulary drills. You're here now. Does the learning stop? Are you done?
Oh, absolutely not. I think the moment you say, I am finished learning, you start losing your skills. I still consider myself a learner. My focus has just shifted.
What are you working on these days?
Now I'm refining. I'm looking at advanced idioms, cultural references, the subtle jokes that make a conversation really sparkle. And I've started writing more.
Writing is great because it slows down the thinking process, right?
Exactly. Journaling, emails, even social media posts. It forces you to structure your thoughts. And I recently joined a book club.
A book club in your second language? That sounds intense.
It is. We read a book in English and then discuss it. It forces me to express complex opinions and defend my point of view. It pushes my boundaries, but it's so much fun.
It sounds like you have successfully transitioned from learning English to living in English.
That is the secret, Tom. You have to build a life where English is just part of the furniture. It's not a chore. It's just how you consume content and connect with people.
And moving to the closing advice. Ria, this has been an incredible look behind the curtain. Before we let our listeners go, I want to boil this down. For the person listening right now who feels stuck, who feels like they are still on that London street feeling lost, what are your top tips?
First and foremost, be patient with yourself. This is a journey, not a race. You're not going to be fluent by next Tuesday, and that is okay.
It's about showing up every day, right?
Exactly. Consistency beats intensity. Practice for 15 minutes every day rather than 5 hours once a week. And please, do not be afraid to make mistakes.
Remember the fool.
Yes, be the fool. Make the mistake. Laugh about it. That is how you learn. Every mistake is a stepping stone.
And I think your point about fun was crucial.
If you aren't enjoying it, you won't do it. Find content you love. Watch cooking shows in English. If you like tech, listen to tech podcasts. Don't force yourself to read boring textbooks.
And finally, surround yourself.
Create that English bubble. Change your phone language. Follow English creators. Talk to yourself. The more you immerse yourself, the more natural it will feel.
Wow, Ria, thank you. Thank you for being so open, for sharing the embarrassing moments, and for giving us a real roadmap to fluency.
Thank you for having me on the hot seat, Tom. It was actually really nice to reflect on how far I've come. I hope it helps someone out there realize that they can do it too.
I know it will. Guys, if you enjoyed this episode, if you saw a bit of yourself in Ria's story, please make sure to subscribe to Real English Voices. We have so many more conversations, tips, and strategies coming your way to help you speak with confidence.
Until next time, keep listening, keep practicing, and remember, every word you learn is a victory.
Take care, everyone.
And hey, if you want to keep this momentum going right now, don't stop. Click on the next episode. Your fluency journey continues right here with us. See you there.